previews and coming attractions, tomorrow, Sunday, November 18th, the Herbie Nichols Project arrives at the Student Center Theater on the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus. And the group was led by Ben Allison and Frank Kimbrough. And they have a very special project, and they're all in this organization empowered by their organization called the Jazz Composers Collective. And one of their important projects centers on a figure out of the 50s, and prior to that time, a man by the name of Herbie Nichols. Well, Ben, once again, if you would, for all of us here, we're beginning to sow the seeds of a Herbie Nichols fan club here.
Good.
And also, too, a supporting arm for the Jazz Collective out of New York. How long have you been working with this material of Herbie's?
Well, I would say as a group, since about 1992, about the time we started the Jazz Composers Collective. Our first concert debuting the project happened in January of 94. We got a National Endowment for the Arts grant to present this two-night concert, and we tackled as much of his music as we could fit into 4 sets, and there were many musicians involved. I think, if I recall correctly, 16 different configurations of musicians. And, since then, the project's really grown and coalesced, and we've, the challenge is to take this extremely personal music of Herbie Nichols and, live through it, breathe through it, not be too reverential about playing it, although we're very particular in our attention to detail in terms of how we transcribe them and making sure we got the notes that he wrote and the chords that he wrote. But once we have that material, we try to, approach it like we'd approach any of our compositions and somehow do our own thing with it.
In your current issue, which is a salute under the heading of Strange City, you have this very fine group. And if you can just take us to one of your rehearsals, you're looking at the scores and right. What's the chemistry? What takes place?
Well, first off, the new record, as I mentioned before, is largely comprised of tunes that Herbie never recorded. So when we dug these up at the Library of Congress, a lot of them were very sketchy, lead sheets at best, certainly not scores. So none of them had any indications as to tempo or dynamics or feel. Some of them didn't even have chord changes. And so we really approached them, they were kind of blank slates a little bit. And so the rehearsals are very organic. Someone will spit out an idea. Some will play through it briefly, and then certain things come to mind. Oh, that sounds like, maybe we should go, and people start throwing out ideas left and right, and we come up with something that feels right. And that's how we've always approached the project. It's very collaborative, and, anything goes.
Do you finally put down a score as such, which you play rather religiously, or do you constantly change, say, a theme like Blue Shout or Shuffle Montgomery? Does it change from performance to performance?
It absolutely changes. There are no scores to any of this stuff. There are no voicings written out, and even on the record, when you hear chords or you hear melodies played in harmony, those are almost always spontaneous harmonies. The saxophone, all the horn players, I think, are particularly adept at spontaneously harmonizing melodies. So, it makes every time we play it a challenge, and every, chorus of the melody has a different orchestration. And, the arrangements, we have come up with things that we like, that we tend to gravitate towards, in terms of the arrangements, in terms of the groove of a particular tune or the flavor of a particular tune. But in terms of, the actual orchestrations, that's pretty spontaneous.
And we're talking about Herbie Nichols' compositions. And what only remains is a lead sheet, is that right?
That's right. Well, this is the thing. In those days, as part of the copywriting process, and after all, that's why these tunes are at the Library of Congress, is that thankfully Herbie was a diligent copywriter. As part of that process, you have to submit basically a melody and a harmony. I mean, that's what you're copywriting. And this is pre-Xerox days, so rather than submit an entire score with voicings, you probably only just sketch something out that would contain the melody and a title and the harmony, and that would do it as far as registering it. I've seen pictures of Herbie where he's sitting at a recording session with what looks like a full score, complete with voicings and all kinds of stuff. And the story behind that, pretty tragic. Apparently, all of those scores and a bunch of his poetry, somewhere upwards of 170 tunes, I've heard, were kept in a trunk in his father's basement. And after Herbie's death, and while his father was in the hospital, the apartment was flooded, and apparently the city came in and cleaned it out, and in the process threw out the trunk and all of its contents. So those were lost, apparently, forever. And
170 compositions.
Scores, no less, with voicings and all kinds of stuff. Obviously, all handwritten, and really a life's work.
Well, certainly one thing that identifies in people's mind that among those compositions, he wrote "Lady Sings the Blues."
Right, that's probably his most famous tune.
Which is identified with Billie Holiday and her autobiography.
For a fascinating study, check out Herbie's rendition, because the bridge of that tune is snaky and oblique and bizarre, so much so that I think Billie Holiday rewrote the bridge to be a little more singable. But Herbie's bridge is really pretty fascinating because it's very different than the one she recorded.
Talking with Ben Allison, who, along with his group, the Herbie Nichols Project, a product of the Jazz Composers Collective, arrives on the scene tomorrow, University of Minnesota Student Theater on the St. Paul campus in St. Paul, Minnesota. Ben Allison, thank you so much for taking us through and building a story and an image and an identification that we can tie into.
Oh, my pleasure.